some fruit bread. So what we're going to use, we're going to have an 800 gram mix, which I've prepared here. It's 600 grams of FWP Matthews organic white, and I've added 200 grams of their Cotswold Crunch, which makes it quite nice, but with a fair amount of white flour in it, it's going to be not too thick, and it'll be a nice open crumb, hopefully. So what we're going to do, well, the first step we've actually done this afternoon, which is to take the starter. Starter came out of the fridge this morning. We sat it at room temperature till about noon to let it come up to room temperature. Then I've added enough flour and water to use 200 grams of it now. So what I did at noon time, because I'm working on a 50% hydration, I put in roughly 140 grams of flour and roughly 80 grams of lukewarm water. Gave it a good stir in and left it with its lid loosely on. So we can see that it's starting to puff up quite nicely now. So it's and it smells nice. It's got a nice kind of acidic flavour, not too pungent, not quite nice. So what we're going to do is we're going to spoon out initially 200 grams of this into the bowl. Get a nice porcelain bowl, and there we are, ordinary spoon. Let's get 200 grams, so there's 90, and you can see, look at the texture of it. It's quite fluffy in there. There's a fair bit of gas building up. And so what we did, we actually put in, we knew we were going to use 200 grams this evening, and so we actually put 200 grams of flour and water into the mix earlier on. So it means that once we've taken the 200 grams out, we'll be back to where we were when we started. So we go 180. It doesn't matter if you're a few grams over, don't be too. There we go, 202 grams, how about that? So there's the 202 grams. And then what we're going to do, we're going to then add some water. Back in a moment. Right, kettle full of lukewarm water. So we're going to zero the scales and we're going to add 560 grams of water. Now I'm going to add another 10 because we're putting in dried fruit, so I need a little bit of water to help that'll soak into the fruit rather than go into the loaf. So let's get 560 grams of water onto the starter. Going to be quite accurate with this. It's bread making simple, but it does require accuracy. Getting the water right is really important. So there's 560, there we go, 569. That'll do. So turn the scales off and we'll give that a little bit of a whiz around. Right, here we go. So what we're doing here is we're going to basically break the starter down into the water to just dissolve it in. And what it'll do, we're doing this because it'll actually it'll mix into the flour better. You don't have to do it actually. I've been making bread for about a year, and this is the first time that I actually mixed the starter with the water before I started. What I normally do is just put the 200 grams straight in and mix it all up, but the expert has told me that that's not the way to do it. So that's not what I'll do. I'll have a go using the expert's way. It's quite it's quite squidgy. It's not going to actually dissolve fully. Anyway, so here we go. Bread making can be a bit slippery on the hands. So anyway, here we go. So wooden spoon this time, and we're going to take the flour, and to the flour we're going to add 200 grams of ordinary mixed fruit. I'm using mixed fruit because it contains lots of peel and nice things like that, which is quite pleasant, rather than just sultanas and currants. And then what I'm going to do as well, I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of fennel seeds, which gives it a lovely aniseed smell and texture. So we're just going to mix those in to the flour, and then we'll put the flour into the liquid. So that's all in, and now we're going to give this a good mixing. Now what we want to do, we want to incorporate all of the flour and all of the liquid and all the starter and all of the ingredients together, so that we're going to get a fairly stiff dough. It's not really a dough at this stage, it's more just a morass of flour and water. But as we get on, what we'll do, it'll actually it'll turn into a bread dough. And basically time and working is what it needs to do. So as you can see here, we're just scooping it round, folding it over with a wooden spoon. I use a wooden spoon because it's a nice rounded shaft on it rather than kind of a sharp metal spoon. So we just want to get everything incorporated. And what we're going to do, once we've got everything incorporated, we're going to leave it for an hour and a half, which is called the autolyzing period. And what that does, that just basically, it allows the water and the flour to mix, and it starts to allow, as I understand it, the kind of starches and stuff to combine. And I don't know, somebody's going to point out that this is total pants. So here we go. Look, we can see the. I'm better at doing it than describing it. So there's the dough coming together. You can see it. It's quite sticky at this stage, but it's the right amount of stickiness. It's not too dry, and it's not too wet. And crucially, all of the ingredients, including the fruit, is nicely added in. So that's going to be enough for now. So I'm just going to scrape this off. There we go. And we just scrape down the sides of the bowl. There we go. Get everything back into the bowl. And now we're going to leave this little fellow for an hour and a half. So don't leave it uncovered, whatever you do. What you can do, you can put a tea towel on it, but it's best to put something on that's airtight. Now I don't have a spare shower cap, and I don't like using cling film, so what I'm going to do is just use an ordinary, fairly close-fitting saucepan lid, and that's going to go onto the mixture like that. It'll touch it a little bit, but it keeps the air out, and it allows the thing to not dry out over the next hour and a half. So that's where we are now. So we've mixed up the flour, the water, the fruit, the fennel, the starter, given it a good mix, and we're going to come back in an hour and a half when it's finished its autolyzing. Then we'll get to the next stage, which is putting the salt into it. Okay, so I'll see you again in an hour and a half's time. Okay. Right. So while we're waiting for the dough to autolyze, we've got an hour and a half to wait. I thought I'd just take you through some of the other little items that you need. You don't need, but they're kind of handy for doing sourdough. The most important thing when you come to bake it, let's do the baking bit first, is when you bake sourdough, you must bake it in a steamy atmosphere. Now there's two ways of doing that. One way is that you put a tray of water in the oven and it creates steam and creates a steamy environment, but it's kind of messy to do it. And what most people do, they tend to go for what's called a Dutch oven. And I've got one here. It's made by a French company called Emile Henry in English, and it's basically a ceramic dish with some high temperature coating on it, and a close fitting lid, and the lid simply goes onto this chap like this. Now it's quite important to get this one right, because when you're baking bread, when you're doing sourdough, you're looking for pretty high temperatures. You're looking for, I bake my sourdough at 260 centigrade. I've experimented up to 270, 275, which is about as high as the oven goes. And it's damn hot. So when you've got hot stuff in the oven, you really don't want it to be heavy, cumbersome, or whatever. You want to be able to get in there, work with it, take the lid off, put your bread in, put the lid back on, without having to heave up several kilos of literally almost red hot cast iron. You don't want to do that. The other thing that you want to make sure is that it's a nice flat base. So you can put the bread onto this flat base, you can score it with a knife, and you haven't got your hands anywhere near a really hot cast iron casserole, that you're really looking at serious skin burns if you touch cast iron that's at 260, 270 centigrade. And the other thing that I would say is I bought myself a, I think it was Cook Shop, I got it on eBay. It was a white ceramic unglazed device about a year ago, and it worked fine for a few months, but it broke in the oven, and it turned out that it wasn't designed to withstand the temperatures. It was good for about 200, 210 centigrade, but it wasn't good for 260, 270, and it broke. It cost me 30 quid, and I thought at the time, that's fine, but you know what, it only lasted a year. This thing, they retail at about, I don't know, 90 or 100 quid. I managed to pick one up on eBay, brand spanking new, £60 delivered, never been out of its wrapping, so quite pleased with that. So that's your Dutch oven, effectively, your bread cloche. A couple of other things that would be handy to have when you're making bread. One is a scoring lame. It's just an old-fashioned razor blade in a holder, and you use this to just score across the top of the bread to allow the crust to expand, otherwise it would burst. It's quite, bread dough is quite abrasive, and it's surprising how quickly these razor blades get blunted off, but it's a really nice thing to use, because when you're doing things quickly in the morning to get this thing, you don't want to be faffing around with a half blunt knife. The other thing that's worth having that I found is one of these little chappies for dividing the dough. When you finally come to finish the dough, which we'll do later this evening, this is a really nice way as a dough knife of just cutting the dough in half. And then finally, when you come to bake, and we'll do this tomorrow morning, but you scatter, here we go, coarse semolina rice, just a little dusting of that onto the hot Dutch oven base, and that actually, it doesn't burn. That's the nice thing about it. Unlike flour, which will burn at those temperatures, what this does, it doesn't burn, but it gives you a nice non-stick finish, so the loaf will never stick to the Dutch oven. So yeah, a couple of other things there. So we'll stitch those in and see how we go. But we'll come back to this lot when we actually get to making the bread tomorrow morning. But right now we'll I don't know, swift G&T or something, I guess, because we've still got an hour and a quarter or so to wait to get back in. Basically, we need to give ourselves about 3.5 hours from starting making bread to the point that the bread is in the bannetons, in the fridge, proving overnight. So about 3.5 hours. So if I start at 6 o'clock, 6:30, I'll be finished about 9:30, 10 p.m. You're not working all the time, but you've got lots of time where you're waiting, but it's about a 3.5 hour cycle. So there we go. Right, on with the wait. Right, so welcome back. There's the 90 minutes time that's just gone off. So we're going to add the salt to the bread. So before we do it, the question is, why do we add salt to sourdough bread? Well, there's several reasons. Yes, it has an effect on the taste, makes it slightly salty. You don't notice the salt, but if you don't put any in, because I did forget once, it's you can really taste it not having salt in it. It's quite a flat taste. But essentially the salt's there for a number of reasons. It improves the texture of the bread, so it makes the it makes the dough stronger, and it also makes it less sticky. Number one. Number two, it reduces oxidation, which means that while you're making the bread, you find that the dough doesn't get a kind of crust, it doesn't oxidize, so it keeps it more stable. It also adds it makes a preservative function as well, so the bread will keep slightly better afterwards. We don't have a problem with that. We slice our bread straight after it's been baked, and then we put it into the freezer. So the question is, which salt and how much do you use? Well, I just use ordinary table salt. Some people use rock salt, sea salt. I think it's you just need to have some salt in there. The crucial amount is how much salt you put in. Now you put in 2%. Now 2% is what they call a baker's percentage, and the percentage that you talk about when you make bread, is always a percentage of the weight of flour. You don't have to worry about the water or anything else. So if you've made an 800 gram loaf, So 2% of 800 grams is 16 grams. So 16 grams is the amount of salt to put in. I've not really tried experimenting hugely, but I'm using 14 to 15 grams just to kind of reduce the salt a little bit. So what we're going to do, we're going to put the salt in. What I prefer to do is just to sprinkle half the salt on, fold it in, put the second half of the salt on and fold it in, and make sure that the salt is really well mixed in, and then we'll leave it to settle for half an hour. We'll talk about stretch and folds later on. For me, everyone has their own idea about this, but for me, this isn't a stretch and fold. This is simply incorporating the salt into the dough. So here's the dough at the moment. It's let's have a look. It's still sticky. It's a little bit different in texture though. It's starting to turn into a bit of a dough. So what we'll do, we'll just sprinkle half the salt on the top like that, and then we'll just fold it in just to make sure that it's well incorporated. I guess we are kind of stretching the dough a little bit by doing this, but we're not actually concentrating on stretching and folding at the moment. We're concentrating on getting the salt in, and then we're going to sit and have another G&T or a beer or something for half an hour while the salt does its work. Now what we'll notice after we've waited the half hour is the dough will start to take on a little bit of a smoother characteristic. It'll be a little bit less sticky, and it'll be a little difficult to describe. It's just a smoother dough. Don't know whether you can see that here, but it's not as sticky, and it's turning a bit more kind of dough-like. You'll see it when we get to the end of the process. You can see the difference from this kind of wet, sticky mass that we had about an hour and a half ago into a proper bread dough. So basically, just bring the wooden spoon round, fold him over, push him down a few times into it, get the salt nicely in, and that's about there. It's 2 or 3 minutes of work every half an hour. There we go, that's the salt in. And that's that, so that's the salt added. Pop the top on so it doesn't dry out. It's a reasonably close fitting lid into the bowl. We can wash this up now. What I've found is, when you're making bread, for goodness sake, wash anything up that's had floury dough on it, because it'll stick like concrete. If you let it dry out on a wooden spoon, you'll be chiseling the stuff off. So the minute you finish with it, which we have now, in the sink, into some soap and water, just leave it for half an hour and the flour will float off. So right, we'll back in half an hour, set the timer, and we'll get onto our first stretch and fold. We're going to do 2 stretch and folds. My neighbour, who's a bit of a sort of a small baker himself, sort of hobby baker turned mini professional, his view is you can't do too many stretch and folds. Commercially, you simply don't have the time to do loads of them. But what I've found is doing 2 separate stretch and folds has a big effect on the quality of the bread. One's fine, but doing the second one really seems to add a little bit to the overall quality. It tends to open the crumb up a little bit, not with great big blowholes, but a nice even open crumb, which is what everyone is trying to achieve, I guess. Anyway, set the timer, half an hour, and we'll be back for our first stretch and fold. Okay, bye. Right, so half an hour, well, almost half an hour, 25 minutes is up. So let's get on with the first stretch and fold. I didn't have any G&T, so I'm still quite sober actually. So here we go. Take the lid off. Here's the no appreciable change to what it looks like. So what we're going to do, we're going to get a bowl of lukewarm water, and we're going to stretch and fold it. Now, there are various views of stretch and fold. Some people just kind of tease it a little bit and just fold it over a couple of times gently. What I'm trying to do, I'm trying to properly stretch it, so properly stretch it and properly fold it. So what we're trying to do is to get a hand underneath it, pull a lump out, give it a bit of a waggle to stretch it out, pop him over the back, turn the bowl round by 90 degrees, same procedure. So what we're doing is we're basically folding it round in quarters, and we keep doing that for a few minutes. So it's not just one or two, there's probably, I don't know, 20 or so stretches that we'll do. And then we'll leave it to rest for another half an hour. We'll come back and do another stretch and fold. And then after that, we'll leave that to rest. Then we'll set it out on the floured surface. We'll just beat it into shape, chop it into two, and then we'll just do a bit of tucking under. But let's get on with the stretch and fold, show you what I mean. So a little bit of warm water always helps to keep your hands kind of a little bit wet at this stage. And one thing, make sure your hands are clean, but don't use soap on them or anything perfumed before you do this, because whatever you have on your hands, if it's wrong, it's going to go straight into the bread and you'll taste it and smell it. So what I've been doing this afternoon, I've been working on my motorbike engine. So if the bread smells faintly of Honda 90, then that's why. But it doesn't smell of perfume because I haven't been using perfume soap. So let's go. So I hope you can see this. So we just tuck our fingers around it just to get it away from the bowl. And it's coming away from the bowl quite nicely now. So tuck your fingers underneath it, pick it up and give it a bit of a shake. Down, round by a quarter, repeat. You see what I'm doing here? So I'm basically just folding it in itself, using a quarter of a turn at a time. What will happen is some of the little bits just tend to ping out. So it's a bit of a bit of fruit on the floor. So just keep going and try to keep it moving and give it a good stretch every time it comes out. So nice shake. You can see the fruit flying out. Keep your hands wet because it will start to pick up at this stage. You can actually feel it starting to improve in texture as you do this. There we go. And so on. You can see what we're doing. We're just basically making sure that we're kind of layering. We're halving and halving and halving the dough to make sure that it's nicely incorporated. And I guess what we're doing also is we're trying to put those kind of horizontal striations into the dough so that as it bakes, it doesn't come out as one homogeneous lump. There's a little bit of shape to the striations in there. So I've lost count. I hope you're keeping count of this. But I don't know. We're probably four full turns, so 12 to 16 quarters. Excuse me, putting the fruit back in every time, and round we go. A bit more water on the hands, and that's it's starting to look a bit more like and feel a bit more like dough. With this bread making, it's really important not just to see what it looks like, but you have to actually feel the stuff. There's the phone ringing. We give that a stiff ignoring and carry on with this. So here we go. That's basically the first stretch and fold finished. So we're pulling up a nice consistent lump now every time, giving it a bit of a shake, and back in. So there we go. You can't see a huge amount of difference, but it feels different. It feels different, and it's coming away from the edge of the bowl quite nicely, and it's starting to. It's got a kind of glossy texture to it. That's all I can describe it as. So there we go. That's stretch and fold number one done. We'll pop the lid back on and give it half an hour. And okay, here we are back again. That's 30-minute bell, and it's dark outside. We started off nice and light. Now it's dark. So here's Mr. Bread. Take the top off. Looks about the same. So number two, we're just going to repeat what we did half an hour ago. We're going to put our fingers in, and we can already feel the difference in this. It's coming away from the sides quite nicely. So keep your fingers wet, and you can see the difference there. That's actually, that's coming out nicely. 1, 2, 3, 4. We're getting a good hand with this dough. We're folding it so that we're managing to stretch it so far that the the bit that's in my finger goes right over to the very back of the dough. So we're not just we're not pussyfooting with it. We're actually putting some work into it. And the stretching, come on, bread experts, help me out here. But the stretching is all part of making the dough work better. You've got to actually, it's something to do with the gluten strands and whatnot inside the bread. But as I said, next door neighbour, keep going as long as you can. So I've limited it to 2. So proper. There we go. You can see it's actually starting to look and feel a lot more like dough. Not sticky, not sticking to the sides of the bowl so much. It's still it's still firing bits of mixed fruit all over the place. But there we go. So that's looking quite nice. Texture's improving. Not sticky. As we said, the salt kind of helps that as well. Stops it oxidising, takes the stickiness out of it, acts as a preservative, improves the taste. Well, it's not to like, but just, your call. It'll be interesting with the salt to actually do a few loaves at some massive reductions in salt. What if you halved the salt? What if you quartered it? What effect would that have? Frankly, I can't be asked to do that, so I prefer to eat the bread rather than run an experiment. But I wouldn't want to have more than 2% of salt in the bread. I think it's unnecessary. You may well taste that on the tip of your tongue, but there we go. Right, so that's number 2. Let's get the top on. Reset the timer for half an hour. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself there. So back in half an hour for the next stage. So there's all the stretching and folding done. Hope it's helped. You can't really see a huge amount on the camera, but it's really what you can feel through your fingers. And when you try it yourself at home, you will find that it's more how it feels than what it looks like. And anyway, it's all part of baking sourdough. It's a lovely thing to do. I've been baking sourdough now for since about last year February. So we're talking about 15 months. And in those 15 months, I have to say I've probably eaten less than 1 slice of shop bought bread. It's just not the same. It's really not the same. And the sourdough is so nice. You can bake it as bread on its own. But it's what you put into it that actually makes the difference. We've experimented with lots of things. We've tried olives, we've tried cheese, we've tried nuts, we've tried raisins, we've tried mixed fruit. We've tried a lot, and I've experimented with temperatures and times. And I've not had a bad loaf yet. The only bad loaf I had was when I misremembered to put the salt in. But no, they come out really nicely every single time. So just got to remember, if you run out of bread one day, you're not going to have any bread until the next day. So you can't just go, oh quick, I've run out of bread, I better bake some. It doesn't work that way. You've got to actually think about taking Mr. Starter out of the fridge after breakfast, letting him warm up, feeding him, letting him digest, and then getting the bread going in the evening. So anyway, let's come back in half an hour and get on to the next stage, okay? Speak in a bit. Bye. Right, well, welcome back. Here's the it's the final half an hour gone now. So take off the lid, and there we are. There's the dough. So looking quite nice. Now what we're going to do here, we're now going to take it out and we're going to divide it into 2 and then start the shaping process. So for this, we're not using water, we're using flour on our hands. I'm not using bread flour, I'm just using ordinary high quality white flour. So let's get going. So we'll dust a bit of flour on the work surface. Again, work surface, make sure it's clean, but make sure it doesn't smell of anything. You don't want to be chopping garlic, onions, you don't want to put bleach and all that lot. And make sure there's no way you can get any tainting of the dough off the surface. So let's just, there we go, there we go. Work it round and outy pops. There we go. And there's a couple of little bits there, we'll put those in. Right, so here we are. A little bit of flour onto the top of him. And let's just, so it's not sticky really, it's a little sticky, but it's not sticky. So we can move him around on the work surface. And what we're doing here, we're just getting him into a form so that we can actually divide him into two. So we want to get the scales, and we said earlier we want about 880 grams per side. So we'll just bit of flour on the scales, just eye it up, get roughly the halfway point and knife it through. I think it's not too accurate here, looking at it. So let's go, see what we've got. 825, yeah, I said this was light. 825 and 935. So we want to take a few grams out of this one. So we'll pop the light one back on. And we'll just make it up to 850, 880, 875, 90, 90, and 71 is that. 84, 893, and 87. So what we're going to do now is we're going to, as we said, we're going to fold this stuff over on itself. So a little bit of flour, mostly on our hands, and we pick the dough ball up, and we just can just do this. You see what I'm doing? I'm just stretching. I'll do it next one slowly, just stretching it and folding it under. So stretching the top surface and folding it onto the bottom surface, putting a bit of tension in the top of the loaf rather than folding the whole thing over itself. So we just haven't got to go mad with that, just so you get a nice clean tension top on it. Put it on the flour surface and put flour on the hands, and do the same again with this one. And then what we're going to do, we're simply going to let it rest, not for half an hour, give it 15-20 minutes just to sort itself out. Then we'll just finely shape it and pop it into the bannetons. There we go, just get that. All right, now for this one, it's probably okay to just pop them down there. And what we do, we'll just put a tea towel over them, because they're only going to be there for a few minutes. So set the clock. Now while we're doing that, these are bannetons, obviously sold in the UK, made in China, I guess, like most other things. You buy two of them, 28 by 15 centimetres or thereabouts, and they come with these natty little covers. The picture on the internet shows the covers inside the banneton, but you don't want to do that. You want to use this to cover them with. But what the banneton's doing, he's going to be holding the dough overnight while it proves, and the job is to wick a little bit of moisture out of the surface of the dough without the dough sticking to the banneton. So what we're going to do, we'll prep them now actually, is to get some rice flour. I've had this rice flour for over a year now. You use literally a sprinkle. You just simply sprinkle a tiny amount into each banneton like that. And then we just simply tap it round. We never wash these, by the way. They just simply sit out for half an hour to dry and they go in the cupboard. So just tap the flour around the bottom, around the sides, and set them to one side. Just make sure we've got a good dusting of rice flour. Again, rice flour is important because it will not, the dough won't stick to that. Okay, so here we are. That's the final weight. What we've got to do now is just final shape in the bantams and good night, chaps. Right, so here we are. Can you see that? No, we can't. Can you? I'll just move it. There we go. There they are. They're just so they've been sat there for 20 minutes and they just spread themselves out gently. So what we're going to do, a little bit more flour on the hands, a bit of flour over those. Don't go mad with the flour, but don't worry too much about it. So we're just going to get this into picture here. So they come off there fairly nicely. Here they are. So a little bit of flour, and what we're doing here, we're doing no more than just simply shaping them. Just get them into a nice sort of dough ball shape, and then they'll go into the Bannerton one by one. So just get them roughly the same shape as Bannerton, drop them in, and what I do, I just give them a quick press down just to even them out, and then pop, where's the covers, there they are, pop a cover on it, here we go, number one. So overnight in the fridge, they're going to expand. I mean, surprisingly, the fridge is what, 4 degrees, 5 degrees, but even at that temperature, they're going to swell up a little bit. They're not going to froth up the way that yeast cooking would do, but because the starter is live, once they go into the oven, the rush of heat, the sort of gradual rush of heat into it, is going to really waken the starter up, and he's going to really start to knock out some CO2. As the temperature comes up, it'll kill the yeasts in there, but not before they've done their job of actually making the thing rise nicely. A little word about ovens. So when we bought our oven, the recipe book said 260 or whatever, and the oven would only go up to about 220, and I thought this is really bizarre. Anyway, we've got one of these kind of clever ovens. It's got lots of, and a lot of modern ovens, they have various settings. So when I work through the various settings, you've got the fan oven, you've got the pizza setting, the bread setting, the da-da-da. What I discovered was that there were two settings. The top and bottom heat will go up to about 275, and also the bottom heat, the pizza setting, will go up, I think, to 260. So what you want is you want bottom heat. You don't want top heat really, because all that's going to do is it's going to risk damaging the cloche. So basically, you want to get 260 degrees. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to bake them at 260 for half an hour. Then I'm going to, with the top on, then I'm going to swiftly open the oven, take the top off, and close the oven, and leave it at 260 for about another 3 or 4 minutes. That's all you need. And that will, because it's so hot in there, that will just take all the moisture, strip the moisture off the crust, and it will just give the crust enough time to just harden and brown. And what I'll do, I'll keep an eye on that. So whatever you do, don't go, 5 minutes on the timer, walk away, because you may come back disappointed and discover that it's actually a little more like charcoal. So 3 to 4 minutes is all you require. So be careful on that one. The half an hour is probably not that important, plus or minus 5 minutes either way. But once you take the top off, it's really important to keep an eye on it. And anyway, we'll cover all of that tomorrow morning. So right now I'm going to head off upstairs because it's about 10:30ish. Get these into the fridge, and then we'll see you tomorrow morning. Okay, bright and early. Good night. Right. So good morning. So it's next morning. We've left the bread in the fridge overnight to prove, and here he is. Remember that last night, and this is where he's got to. So he's a bit fatter, hasn't swollen up, but he's ready to go. So the oven's been going for a few minutes now. It's up 260 degrees, nice and warm. I've left it for a few more minutes just to make sure that everything is toasty hot. So what we have with us is the bread. We have the lame for scoring the bread, and the semolina rice that we're just going to sprinkle on the base. So what we'll do first of all, we'll just give it a quick knock. Yeah, he's nice and free. Things are hot, so nice silicone safety glove. So make sure everything's right. Get the top off of the flour. And what I'm going to do, when I take the lid off, I'm going to put the lid onto a wooden chopping board. It's not a brilliant chopping board, but it's wood. Because what I don't want to do is to sink all of the heat out of the cloche's lid. For two reasons. One, I don't want it to cool down. And secondly, I don't want to chill it because it's made of ceramic. I don't want it to crack. So There's the cat meowing in the background. Right, so here we go. Get the cloche out, lift the lid off quickly. A quick sprinkle of flour, that's all we need. Right, here's the bread. Drop him in carefully, and then with the lame, just 4 nice little slits across the top. 1, 2, 3, 4. Put the lid back on. Make sure it's centralised, back in the oven, and there we go. In 30 minutes time, we'll have a loaf. Well, we won't have a loaf perfectly, but we'll have the loaf baked, and as we said, we'll take the lid off, we'll leave it for 3 to 4 minutes to brown up, and then job's good. We've got our breakfast loaf, so let's call back in 30 minutes, okay? Right, so the 30-minute time has just gone off, and we'll see what the bread's doing. So, hope you can just adjust that a little bit. There we go. Right, so we're going to pop the lid off. Oh, it's hot. There we go. Lid goes onto the wood, and there's the bread. Da, da, da. So back in. Looking fairly brown at the moment, so we'll give him, I don't know, probably about 2 minutes or so. That's all we need. Meanwhile, what we'll do, we'll get the next bread ready. We'll pop the lid off. Just give it a little bit of a tap, make sure he's clean at both ends, which he is. Looking forward to this. Right, there's 2 minutes, and he's looking quite nice actually. The thing with the fruit loaf is not to leave it in too long without the cover, because any little bits of fruit on the top are going to crisp fairly hard. So we want to kind of avoid that if we can. So let's get the oven gloves and pop him out. There he is. 1 loaf. Onto the cooling tray, and we'll get the lid back on and just let it warm through for a couple of minutes, and then we'll put the second one in. It doesn't lose much temperature when it comes out the oven, but we might as well just recover what we can. So lid off, sprinkle with semolina flour. On he goes. Quick slash. 1, 2, 3, 4. Fairly deep cuts. Put the lid back on. Put them in. And there we go. Another 30 minutes and the second loaf. Right. So while the second one's cooking, let's have a quick look at loaf number 1. Here he is. You can see the slash marks, which started out as just razor thin marks, have now the loaf's swollen up, and what those have done, those have actually allowed a kind of controlled explosion or controlled expansion inside the loaf. If you don't do them, it's not a problem, but the bread will actually expand itself, and so it'll probably burst out somewhere, and it won't be too attractive. I've tried a few different slashing techniques, longitudinal. I've tried to get the kind of horizontal cut so it just pairs up, but you know what, I think for me just the simple four cuts on the top are good. It makes a nice attractive loaf, and it's consistent. I'm probably boring, but it's what I like. Having invested 3.5 hours of my life in doing the bread on the evening beforehand, I just like to make sure that it's consistent and the same every time, and it tastes really nice. So that's why we're doing it, isn't it? Right, 30 minutes are up. So here's loaf number 2. Well, it's not quite 30 minutes. It's just a little bit less. Let's have a quick look, see what we've got. So come, lid off, and there we are. Exactly the same as the first one. So back in. Leave it for a few minutes, and in fact, 2 minutes. 2 minutes will be fine for this one. Glove's nice, isn't it? Hello, Mr. Bread. Hello. Right. Dum-de-dum-de-dum-de-dum, dum-de-dum-de-dum-de. Right, so what we're looking for just a little bit of browning on the crust. When I say browning, we're not looking for the whole crust to go brown. We're looking for the little sharp edges to just crisp. They're kind of light brown when the top comes off, and we want them to crisp back to a kind of dark brown, just to give it a. There we go. There's the 30 minutes. So we were, as I said, 3 or 4 minutes in. Yeah, so we want to just get the sharp edges crisped. It just makes it easier to cut, and it just gives a nice little sharp bite to the bread. When we toast it, because we tend to cut it up and freeze it, we tend to eat the bread toasted, and it's delicious. It's delicious. Anyway, let's have a look. See where we are now. He's looking good. So pop him out. Pop the top back on. So we want to let the cloche cool down gradually. So what we'll do, we won't leave it out of the oven. We'll pop it back in the oven and turn the oven off and let the heat come down slowly, and that will bring the temperature of the cloche down slowly as well. So hopefully no risk of cracks. Let's have a look. Let's have a look at the bread that we've just baked. There's number 1, and there's number 2. You can see pretty much consistently similar. We give us half an hour or so just to chill down. Then we'll cut them. We'll cut them and have a look inside and see what we've managed to do on the crumb.